From the National Newsroom of the Canadian Press, I'm Jason White. American President Donald Trump is indicating he'll ask the U.S. Supreme Court to quickly overturn a federal appeals court ruling finding many of his tariffs illegal.
U.S. President Donald Trump says he's going to the Supreme Court as early as tomorrow because he says they need a quick decision. Last Friday, the United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit found that Trump's Liberation Day tariffs and his fentanyl-related duties exceeded his powers under a national security statute that he used to impose them. The appeals court said that the tariffs could stay in place while the Trump administration takes the case to the Supreme Court. Trump says he'll ask the Supreme Court for an expedited ruling and claims that if the duties are removed, it could be devastating for the United States. Kelly Malone, The Canadian Press, Washington.
Environment Canada says air quality warnings are in effect for much of Alberta and western Saskatchewan. And scientist Christy Kleimenhaga says the smelly haze is expected to last into the week.
Expecting a shift back to southerly winds coming in from the south, which should help things a little bit by tomorrow, but, at least in southern Alberta, but expecting it to be a relatively smoky week for much of the western prairies.
She says those most at risk include adults aged 65 and up, babies, and people with pre-existing health conditions. She says those folks should avoid strenuous activities. Leaders from more than 600 First Nations across Canada are meeting for the first time since legislation to fast-track major infrastructure projects. The Assembly of First Nations is hosting its annual General Assembly in Winnipeg, starting tomorrow. National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak says not all First Nations agree on how to respond to the major projects bill. But they do agree on one thing.
I know that conversations are difficult at times on many issues, but making sure that the FPIC, Free, Prior and Informed Consent for First Nations people, is respected.
Other topics over the course of the three-day assembly will likely include closing the infrastructure gap on First Nations and federal budget expectations. Canada is pledging to support the Afghan people after a devastating earthquake killed more than 1,400. Canada allows for humanitarian aid in Afghanistan, but strictly limits development work under terrorism legislation because of the Taliban government. The head of the Toronto-based Afghan Women's Organization warns that will hold back efforts to help Afghans rebuild. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has poured out a bottle of Crown Royal at a press conference. He's angry the company behind the whiskey is closing its bottling facility near Windsor, Ontario, early next year.
I always say smart people aren't too smart, and you guys are about as dumb as a bag of hammers for doing this.
The move will affect about 200 jobs, but spirits maker Diageo says the Crown Royal it sells in Canada will still be bottled in Canada, and the whiskey will continue to be mashed, distilled, and aged at Canadian facilities. This is the Canadian Press. In sports, the Toronto Maple Leafs have signed goalie Dennis Hildeby to a 3-year extension. It's a 2-way contract for the next 2 seasons and 1-way in the final year. It has an average annual value of just over $841,000 US. And the Calgary Flames have hired former team captain Dave Lowry as an assistant coach. The Sudbury, Ontario native spent the past 3 seasons as an assistant with the Seattle Kraken. The Toronto Blue Jays are in action again tonight facing the Reds in Cincinnati. Toronto dropped yesterday's series opener 5-4, but still have a 2.5-game lead on the New York Yankees and Boston Red Sox in the AL East. Canadian striker Kyle Larin has joined Dutch league leader Feyenoord on loan from Spain's RCD Mallorca. The 30-year-old is from Brampton, Ontario. And the oldest player in the Northern Super League has announced her retirement after a season-ending injury. 42-year-old goalkeeper Aaron McLeod was the first ever signing by Halifax Tides FC. From the Canadian Press, I'm Jason White.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to follow and subscribe. For more of today's top stories, visit thecanadianpressnews.ca.